The purpose of this video is to explore procurement approaches needed to support the guiding tenets and action plan proposed as part of the MES modernization strategy. Some may be wondering why the focus on procurement? Why is something different needed? To answer this question, let's go back and look at the Deliver with Purpose tenet of the MES modernization strategy. The hypothesis posed by the strategy is that we can identify outcomes as our delivery scope, instead of modules or solutions, which anticipates a need to experiment with dozens of technologies, likely requiring services from several external vendors. Accomplishing this is unlikely without a way to rapidly acquire and experiment with solutions to make decisions about either scaling or discarding software products and/or vendors. As covered in the prior action planning decision-making video, we need a process that, at least for the initial outcome experimentation, creates a reversible bead string door decision-making process for solutions and approaches. As covered in earlier challenges diagnosis videos, traditional procurement processes often present several challenges to meeting this need. Mainly that procurement simply takes too long. A typical procurement lifecycle for a Medicaid modernization module is commonly longer than a year. Fundamentally, states' needs change faster than this process supports. Technology advances faster than this process supports. And once contracts are signed and initial solutions delivered, the costs and efforts to switch vendors is so high that states have almost no negotiating or competitive leverage to performance manage the vendors who have won the work. The MES modernization strategy framework seeks to create the foundational environment to mitigate these problems and identifies a few ways to navigate procurement in a way that supports the strategy construct. We'll start by summarizing proposed procurement approaches for mitigating those issues, which build upon one another to address the challenges. First, we can separate contractual scope for services and software licensing, and keep those two types of scope as contractually independent as possible. When it comes to the software license side, we can look to build procurement processes that support rapid experimentation as a software product selection method. It could be free or almost free to try out the software in a pre-production mode. The licensing terms should be clear, defining the methodology for charging license fees once in production, how the costs are divided among the different stakeholders who use the software, and the level of support included. It should be possible for any vendor or state personnel to implement the software. States should be able to immediately try software meeting these conditions in pre-production environments with a fast turnaround once requested. And a clear exit plan should be provided for how states' data can be extracted in industry standard formats quickly if the state decides to change products in the future. When it comes to services, we need procurement processes that support bringing in experts to integrate purchased software products to deliver the prioritized outcomes. Note that an important distinction is needed about services scope, which includes work often considered part of software contracts. For example, customizing, configuring, and integrating those software products within the environment. Services scope could involve building entire custom software solutions to perform specific business functions. Services scope could also include experimenting with and making decisions about which software products to use to deliver the defined outcomes. The strategy proposes a few key concepts for managing this services scope. Use outcomes achievement as the primary scope of these contracts. The Deliver with Purpose guiding tenet has set up the framework making this possible. Performance manage these contracts based solely on the vendor's ability to deliver the outcome results. Create a repeatable process that manages according to past performance. If a vendor is demonstrating the ability to achieve outcomes better than other vendors, scale investment in this vendor. If the vendor is not, descale or eliminate the vendor as quickly as possible. Of course, both sets of scope are likely needed unless the solution will be fully custom built. And both sets of scope will need to be coordinated effectively, possibly even being delivered by the same vendor. But the key of this proposed approach is to avoid mixing the two from a contractual term standpoint. Next, when it comes to buying software products, we can build an approach around experimentation in which we implement products before making purchasing commitments. This approach explores how we might acquire software products differently once we've confirmed a prioritized outcome or business challenge to solve. In contrast to traditional methods, which typically involve long periods of analysis, capability mapping, and solution requirements gathering, then procuring, then implementing those predefined solutions, what if we can switch that order to experiment first by implementing multiple solutions in a pre-production environment, using outcomes as a guide rather than system requirements, then analyzing what works, then purchasing and subsequently scaling only working software proven to improve outcomes in the environment. Traditional MES modernization efforts spend millions of dollars and years of effort debating about a solution roadmap, writing solution requirements, and performing extensive alternatives analysis and product selections before knowing if those solutions will work in the state's unique context. At this point, it's common to have sunk so much money into the decisions made years prior that pivoting is not an option, even if it becomes clear those decisions were bad. The MES Modernization Strategy Framework hypothesizes we can move this first point of learning up considerably with this alternative approach. Another mitigation approach we could implement is to tailor the procurement to the phase of work. Note this approach is specific to services scope. If we define our phases using the proposed above sequencing, the initial periods of time represent an innovation phase, which is when experimentation is needed with multiple solutions to inform solution decisions. Once solutions are confirmed and selected, we move into a scaling phase, likely requiring a different procurement approach from the innovation phase. This is also likely very different from the services required for ongoing maintenance. We suggest keeping these separate, with different contractual terms and conditions and different performance criteria. Because each phase must be optimized differently, we may find it beneficial to leverage different expertise from vendors or minute teams depending on the phase. Note that the proposed procurement content included in this video focuses primarily on the innovation phase, which is where we anticipate starting work as we launch the MES modernization strategy. Lastly, to increase the effectiveness of these approaches, we can build support structures for vendors organized around prioritized outcomes. This approach is also specific to services scope. It's common for procurement processes and resulting contracts to focus on ensuring our vendors deliver the solutions and deliverables detailed in the contract. We often ensure this by creating state enforcement or oversight structures. This might even come in the form of hiring yet additional services vendors, perhaps as a project or program management office or PMO, or as an independent validation and verification or IV&V capacity. These structures are optimized for verifying what was delivered by vendors, meets the specifications established in advance, sometimes prescribing to vendors how they are expected to deliver the deliverables. However, if we are able to define contract scope in terms of outcomes, without specifying the solution or approach, we can align our capacity, both vendor and state, at achieving those outcomes with a state support structure designed to be responsive to whatever changes are required to meet the outcome terms, empowering experts to decide the what and the how, and keeping state capacity focused on the why. With an outcomes focus limited only to a fraction of the business scope, the issues preventing end-to-end outcome achievement should become clear. This might be related to challenges integrating with legacy systems, but might also require changes to process, policy, or rules. Dedicated capacity will be needed to raise these issues quickly for decisions and either mobilize work to make changes or accept the impacts on the outcomes. We expect these procurement approaches to be possible if leveraging the MES modernization strategy. Before getting into a potential procurement approach for implementing these approaches targeted at resolving the challenges from our diagnosis, let's make sure we're addressing key procurement goals and ensure we're keeping them in mind as we evaluate and discuss alternative approaches. There are many goals of the procurement process, but we'll touch on the two most commonly referenced as the rationale for many of the current practices used today: best value and free and fair competition. Any alternative approach we develop must ensure that the state maximizes its return on investments. The vendor selection process must be transparently aligned with the principle of achieving the best value, free from influence from factors other than the demonstrated attainment of that value. Now we've reached a point where the proposed strategy and high-level approaches meet execution. Next, we'll outline a procurement process and contractual terms to integrate these approaches while ensuring alignment with the principles of best value and ensuring free and fair competition. Keep in mind this is an example intended to generate dialogue and discussion with others, including State of Minnesota procurement experts. The proposed example assumes three primary separate activities. 1. Publishing and maintaining a program reference library and corresponding vendor support structure. 2. Releasing recurring software product requests for proposals, or RFPs. And 3. Releasing multiple recurring requests for offers, or RFOs, through Minsight for system integration services. Starting with Step 1, Vendor Reference Information and Support Structures. Ensuring all vendors, both incumbent and prospective, have access to key project information is essential for maintaining fair competition. To support this, the following examples could be published, maintained, and made available to all vendors: the MES modernization strategy, the defined execution approach, delivery backlogs including the outcomes and the initial slice of work in progress, a repository of delivery artifacts documenting the complete enterprise architecture of solutions delivered to date, and a comprehensive list of supported enterprise assets that can be quickly provisioned for use and the standards that must be followed when using them. This list should include software products supported by the Enterprise Architecture Office for use in the future, as well as legacy systems expected to be retired once modernization is complete. Additionally, support structures will be needed to maintain these information sources and support delivery efforts. Some examples of support structures might include items such as coordination support staff to facilitate the execution approach, ensure clarity of outcome scope, and associated scope boundaries set by the backlog item in focus, as well as manage and coordinate the resolution of blockers identified that are preventing outcome improvement. Enterprise architecture support staff to provide access and assist with connectivity to any currently supported enterprise asset, as well as ensure a clear understanding of the standards for documenting new enterprise architecture once defined. And legacy support staff to coordinate any integrations or changes to existing legacy systems. Moving on to proposed step 2, releasing recurring software product RFPs. The RFP could be issued referencing the above background, which makes clear the overall vision, the planned execution approach, and initial outcomes focus. It could request responses from vendors including the following commitments: a commitment to provide the software for free to pilot in a pre-production mode and whatever pre-production environments are needed to implement it. A commitment to provision the software for implementation by anyone who wins a subsequent services contract and chooses to use the product in an experiment. And a commitment to meet all enterprise governance, regulatory, and compliance requirements, which should also be published in advance when available. Responses could also include the following details: the licensing terms for the software, including how the state will be charged once the software is in production, and how the charges will be split among different groups who must budget for the cost separately. Any standards and configuration specifications needed to implement the software, including how different enterprise groups could share the product for independent use cases, and the software service level agreements and support available as part of the licensing costs. Note, another possible option for accomplishing this step is leveraging currently established master agreements and/or resellers for access to software products, especially if those agreements were established with aligned terms. The next step is the evaluation, which is where we need corresponding services work. We can identify the list of software products meeting the commitment requirements from the RFP and reseller agreements and publish them, along with all available supported enterprise assets as inputs to step 3, which is to release recurring RFOs through Minsight for system integration services. The RFO could be issued listing the same background information from step 1, now also including pending software products from step 2. The scope of the solicitation could be defined as the first priority outcome and the first few slices of end-to-end scope from the delivery backlog, with no system requirements other than that the vendor must use an available product from the in-progress software RFP, reseller list, or the approved enterprise asset list. The scope could also list any specific enterprise architecture policies, standards, or integration requirements that must be followed, if known and agreed upon. We could request vendors to respond with de-identified response documents to facilitate anonymous, completely unbiased evaluation. We could explore requesting alternative responses for evaluation, like a brief one-page description of why the vendor is best positioned to achieve the outcomes and the monthly cost for the vendor team. We could select multiple vendors, let's say 3 for this example, based on the anonymous evaluation of the response and the monthly cost, and move into execution with all 3, which is where these steps merge to create the proposed engine of this approach. The services vendors are fully supported by the support structures from step 1, with the individuals involved aligned on the achievement of the outcome. Each vendor can use any software product supported currently by the enterprise as an asset, available on a reseller list, or being evaluated as part of the software RFP. There's nothing in this process that prevents the same vendor from both proposing a software license and separately services to integrate it. From a payment milestone standpoint, the contract could stipulate monthly payment contingent upon a report from each vendor detailing the outcomes achieved. Performance management could then be based entirely on a comparison of value delivered, outcomes divided by cost, between vendors. Now we have established the building blocks for the ongoing performance management. Services vendors can be scaled and descaled through a steady cadence of new RFOs, which allows decision makers to accept additional new teams from new vendors or existing vendors and eliminate contracts for vendors or teams that are not performing well. Similarly, new innovative software products can be proposed, experimented with, and selected through this process based on proven integrations with a pre-production environment. only products proven to work in the environment and pass all enterprise review processes and governance, regulatory, and compliance requirements are locked into an ongoing contract. At which point, those products can be added to the enterprise asset list and are made available to any implementer to select them going forward. The software RFP can also be repeated to ensure new products can be added for consideration on a repeatable cadence. And that summarizes an example of a potential method to achieve the desired approaches and overcome the procurement challenges identified in the strategic challenges diagnosis. In summary, let's highlight a few of the anticipated benefits of this approach. 1. Removing contractual barriers preventing states from experimenting with technology. Any product can be proposed and attempted at any time. 2. Proving out technology in a low-cost, low-risk mode before making large investments of time and/or money. 3. Outsourcing product alternatives analysis to practitioner vendors rather than strategy vendors and state staff. 4. Eliminating vendor lock-in scenarios and giving stakeholders the ability to transition to new services vendors or transition to Minute at any time. 5. Managing vendor performance based on a vendor's ability to deliver value, outcomes divided by cost. And 6. Aligning work around a desired outcome rather than focusing on specific systems and processes.